We are KB and Jasmine, and welcome to Beyond the Silver Screen.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into the films of Steven Spielberg. You've given us a stack of film theory texts, so it seems like you're not just interested in like the popcorn thrills, you know, but in like what really makes his films tick and work. And honestly, I was surprised by how much there is to uncover.
Yeah, it was kind of fascinating, isn't it? Spielberg is like one of the most popular directors ever, but he hasn't always gotten that level of serious critical attention you might expect.
Yeah.
You know, it's like his success somehow became a barrier to people really engaging with his work. Like it was just too big to really analyze.
Yeah, it's like the critics were so focused on like Spielberg, the phenomenon, Spielberg, the box office king, that they missed the opportunity to look at Spielberg, you know, the filmmaker, the artist.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's this sense that, especially after 1941, you know, which wasn't as well received, that critics were like reacting more to his success than to the actual films themselves. I mean, there's even a quote from a film scholar, Charo, that describes this shift, you know, like they were saying that writers started positioning themselves in response to Spielberg's success rather than like, you know, engaging with the work like on its own terms.
So we're not just going to be like, oh, we love E.T. so much, you know, we're going to go deeper, right? We're going to look at like the cinematic language, the themes, the anxieties that his films tap into. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think a good place to start is with this perception of Spielberg as a genre filmmaker.
Right.
You know, someone known for like fantasy and adventure.
Right.
Because those elements are definitely, I mean, it's part of what makes his films so appealing to like a wide audience. But there's often this sense that those things overshadow the deeper layers of his work.
So it's like those big spectacular set pieces, right? Like the shark in Jaws or the spaceship in Close Encounters. They're so captivating, you know, that we might miss the subtler details, like the social commentary or the character development.
Yeah, precisely. And one of the film theory texts that you gave us actually uses this really interesting analogy to explain this. It talks about how Spielberg's films, especially the earlier ones, share elements with this ancient literary genre called the Menipia.
Menipia.
Yeah. Stick with me here because this is where it gets interesting. The Menipia, according to this source, was known for like breaking the rules of realism and often had this like carnivalesque quality to it.
Carnivalesque.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mean like fun and playful,
yeah,
but also maybe a little chaotic and subversive.
Yes. Exactly. And the source argues that this connects to how Spielberg's films function as these like public events, you know. They draw these huge audiences and everyone kind of participates in this collective experience of wonder and spectacle.
Okay, I can see that. I mean, think about that iconic opening scene in Close Encounters, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But the kids racing through the neighborhood and the lights go out.
Yeah, yeah.
And those dramatic shadows, like...
It's pure cinematic spectacle, right? Designed just grab your attention and pull you into the story.
Exactly. And that visual spectacle, it's not just for show, right? It's like, it's part of Spielberg's cinematic language, you know?
Yeah.
It's how he sets the stage, creates the mood, and even foreshadows some of the film's like key themes.
Okay. So we should be paying attention to those big dramatic moments, but also to the quieter moments, right? The details, the visual cues that might be hiding in plain sight.
Absolutely. And one film that really exemplifies this, I think, is Close Encounters itself.
Okay.
On the surface, it's this awe-inspiring story of first contact. But if you look closer, you know, there are all these layers of meaning embedded in the film's structure and symbolism.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of detail should I be looking for?
Well, one source points out how Spielberg uses these self-reflexive openings in his films.
You know, remember that opening shot in Close Encounters where we see that projection screen and then it cuts to an actual projection screen like within the film itself?
Oh, wow. I never even noticed that.
It's almost like he's winking at the audience, you know? Reminding us that we're watching a movie, like a constructed reality.
Yeah, it's like he's playing with our expectations.
Yeah.
You know, blurring the lines between what's real and what's imagined.
Exactly. And he does this with humor, too. Like, for example, after the alien ships first appear, the announcement over the loudspeaker is, "That's all, folks," you know?
Yeah.
Like a playful nod to the Looney Tunes cartoons, a reminder not to take things too seriously.
That's so Spielberg. Even when he's dealing with these big existential themes like alien contact, he finds a way to inject humor and playfulness into his work.
Right. And, you know, he even went back and created a special edition of Close Encounters.
Yeah.
Which further emphasizes this idea that there are multiple layers to his films, you know, multiple ways to interpret them.
Okay, so we've established that Spielberg is a master of visual spectacle. But he's also like a subtle storyteller, right? hiding these deeper meanings beneath the surface. But he's often criticized for being overly sentimental, for simplifying complex issues. How do we reconcile those critiques with this idea of Spielberg as this, like, complex filmmaker?
That's a great point. And it leads us perfectly to our next film, Jaws.
Jaws, okay.
I know what you're thinking. A giant shark terrorizing a small town doesn't exactly scream nuanced social commentary.
Yeah, it's more like Run for Your Lives.
Right. But let's look at the context in which the film was made. It was the mid-70s. America was still reeling from the Vietnam War. The Watergate scandal had, like, eroded public trust in government. There was this sense of disillusionment and anxiety kind of in the air.
Okay. I'm starting to see how that could seep into a film, even one about a shark.
Exactly. And one source points out how the film reflects this specific post-Watergate anxiety. Think about the character of Mayor Vaughn. He's so focused on keeping the beaches open, on protecting the town's economy, that he ignores the very real danger posed by the shark. It's a classic case of, like, prioritizing profit over safety.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Mayor Vaughn does have a very Nixonian vibe now that you mention it. It's like he's more worried about bad press than about people getting eaten.
Exactly. And it's not just the mayor. Think about the three main characters, Brody, Hooper, and Quint.
Right.
They each represent a different aspect of masculinity and how it interacts with, like, the social order.
Okay.
Quint, with his obsession, his almost like Ahab-like pursuit of the shark, ends up being consumed by it.
Right.
Brody, on the other hand, ultimately rejects Quint's machismo and chooses a path of social integration and responsibility.
That's pretty insightful. I never thought about Jaws as a commentary on masculinity. But it makes sense. It's like Spielberg is using this genre framework, this monster movie, to explore these deeper anxieties about American society and the role of men within it.
And it goes even deeper than that. The film uses this technique called focalization, which is a fancy way of saying, like, how the film controls what information the viewer has access to, how we experience the events. For example, remember that iconic beach scene where the shark attacks?
How could I forget? It's terrifying.
Exactly. But the way it's shot with those underwater shots and quick cuts, it both immerses us in the chaos and holds us at a safer move at the same time.
Okay.
We feel the tension, the fear, but we're not completely overwhelmed by it.
You're totally blowing my mind here. It's like there's a whole film school lesson hidden within Jaws.
Well, that's the thing about Spielberg. He's a master of using genre conventions to explore these deeper themes. And often those themes are reflecting the anxieties and concerns of the time period in which the film was made.
Right. So far, we've explored how Spielberg uses visual spectacle. He hides deeper meanings and even tackles social commentary within his genre films. What else should we be looking for as we dive deeper into his filmography?
Keep an eye out for the recurring motif of light. It's something that pops up throughout his work, often symbolizing truth, power, or even the cinematic apparatus itself.
Okay.
And it plays a particularly interesting role in our next film, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Indiana Jones. Now we're talking.
Yeah.
But how does light figure into a film that's mostly about whip-cracking action and globe-trotting adventure?
Well, think about those glowing stained glass windows in the university scene.
Okay.
Or the Ark of the Covenant itself, which is depicted as this, like, blinding light source. Even Indy's shadow is often projected across the screen, highlighting this interplay of light and darkness.
Yeah, you're right. I never really thought about those details before. But how do they connect to, like, the larger themes of the film?
One source suggests that light in Raiders symbolizes truth and knowledge, but also danger and power. The Ark, for example, is both a sacred relic and a destructive weapon. It's like Spielberg is suggesting that knowledge can be both illuminating and dangerous.
And maybe he's also drawing a parallel to the power of cinema itself. You know, it can be a source of entertainment, but also a tool for propaganda, a way to manipulate emotions and beliefs.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important theme that runs throughout Spielberg's work. This blurred line between reality and fiction. And that's a theme that takes on a particularly dark and complex dimension in Twilight Zone, the movie, which unfortunately was marked by a tragic accident on set.
Oh, yeah, the accident that took the lives of Vic Morrow and the two child actors. Yeah, it's a stark reminder that the world of filmmaking isn't always glamorous and fun. There are real risks involved, and sometimes tragedy strikes.
And it's particularly poignant in a film that's all about blurring the lines between reality and fantasy, about the consequences of our actions and the unpredictable nature of life itself.
Yeah, this is getting pretty heavy. How do we even begin to analyze a film that's so intertwined with real-life tragedy?
It's definitely challenging, but one source suggests looking at it through the lens of modality.
Modality. Okay, break that down for me. What is modality in film theory?
So basically, it's how viewers judge the realness of a film and how that affects their emotional and cognitive responses. Think about it this way. A documentary feels more real than a fantasy film, right?
Yeah, because we know that the events in a documentary actually happened, whereas a fantasy film is pure imagination.
Exactly. But even within fantasy films, there are varying degrees of modality. Like, for example, Temple of Doom is this wild, over-the-top adventure film, while Schindler's List, even though it's based on real events, employs a more stylized, almost dreamlike aesthetic at times.
So different viewers might experience those films with different levels of realness,
Yeah.
depending on their own personal experiences, beliefs, and, knowledge of film history.
Right. And this concept of modality helps us understand why some films affect us more deeply than others, and how those emotional responses might influence, like, what we learn from a film.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about spectacle, symbolism, social commentary, and even the psychological impact of film. And this is just the beginning.
There's so much more to unpack, but I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding the depth and complexity of Spielberg's work.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive even deeper in our next segment. Okay, so we've established that Spielberg isn't just about, like, escapist entertainment. His films are layered with meaning. They reflect social anxieties. They play with our perceptions of reality. And they often explore the darker aspects of, like, human nature.
Yeah, precisely. And as his career progressed, this exploration of the human condition, both its triumphs and its failings, it becomes even more pronounced, I think.
So where do we go from here? Like, which film takes us deeper into this exploration of the human experience?
Well, let's talk about Schindler's List. This is where Spielberg tackles one of the most horrific chapters in human history, the Holocaust. And he does so with this rawness and emotional depth. That's unlike anything we've seen in his previous work.
Yeah, Schindler's List is a heavy one. It's a masterpiece, no doubt. But it's also incredibly difficult to watch.
Yeah.
I remember being just emotionally drained after seeing it for the first time.
Absolutely. And it's a film that sparked a lot of debate even before it was released. Some people argued that the Holocaust was simply too horrific to be depicted on screen, that it was impossible to capture the true scope of the tragedy without, like, trivializing it.
Yeah, it's like saying that some things are just too sacred, too painful to be turned into entertainment.
Exactly. And this connects to a broader conversation about the ethics of representation, about how we tell stories about traumatic events and the responsibility we have to, like, honor the victims while also engaging with the complexities of history.
So how does Spielberg navigate this incredibly sensitive territory? How does he approach such a monumental and horrific subject matter?
Well, one thing that stands out right away is his use of black and white.
Yeah.
It's the stark visual choice that immediately sets this film apart from his more fantastical work.
Yeah, the black and white definitely creates a different mood, a sense of historical weight and gravitas. It's like he's signaling to the audience, this is not your typical Spielberg film.
Right.
This is something different, something real.
Exactly, but it's not just an aesthetic choice, The black and white also serves a deeper purpose, I think, to evoke the historical photographs and documentaries of the era. It's like he's trying to bridge the gap between fiction and reality to remind us that this story, as horrific as it is, actually happened.
Yeah, it's like he's using those visual cues to ground the film in a sense of historical authenticity, to create a connection between the past and the present.
Right. And one source even compares Spielberg's approach to that of Claude Lanzmann, who directed Shoah, which is this groundbreaking documentary about the Holocaust. Now, Schindler's List isn't a documentary, of course, but Spielberg does draw on certain techniques of documentary filmmaking to create a sense of authenticity and immediacy.
Like what? What kind of techniques is he using?
Well, think about the way the film uses handheld cameras,
Right.
The grainy footage, those moments of blurred motion, it's all very deliberate. A way to disrupt the polished visual style that we typically associate with Spielberg's work.
It's like he's intentionally making the film feel less cinematic, less perfect, in order to create a sense of realism of being present in that time and place.
Exactly. And it's a very different approach to the kind of spectacle that we saw in Jaws or Raiders. Here, the spectacle is rooted in realism, in the unflinching portrayal of human suffering.
It's like he's saying we can't turn away from this.
Yeah.
We can't sugarcoat it. We have to confront the horror of what happened.
Right. And it's a challenging experience for the viewer. But it's also a necessary one, I think, because in confronting this darkness, in bearing witness to these atrocities, we're also acknowledging the resilience of the human spirit. the capacity for compassion and hope, even in the face of unimaginable evil.
And that's where the character of Oskar Schindler comes in, right? He's this complex, flawed figure who ultimately chooses to use his position of power to save lives. He's not a saint, but he's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, individuals can make a difference.
And it's interesting that even in a film as serious as Schindler's List, Spielberg doesn't completely abandon those signature touches,
Yes.
those visual motifs that we've come to associate with his work.
Really, like what?
Well, think about the recurring motif of light.
Okay.
It's there in Schindler's List,
Yeah.
but it takes on a different meaning. It's no longer this source of wonder and magic, but rather this fragile, flickering flame in the midst of darkness.
You mean like that single candle that Schindler lights in his factory
Yeah.
to celebrate the Sabbath?
Yeah.
Such a powerful image, a symbol of hope and resistance,
Yeah.
in the face of overwhelming despair.
Exactly, and that's what makes Spielberg such a masterful filmmaker, I think. He's able to adapt his style to use those familiar motifs in new and unexpected ways, to create a layered and emotionally resonant experience for the viewer.
Okay, so we've seen how Spielberg tackles historical trauma in Schindler's List, using this combination of documentary techniques, stark visuals, and subtle symbolism to create this powerful and unforgettable cinematic experience. Where do we go from there? How does he continue to explore these darker aspects of human experience? Well, let's jump ahead a few years and talk about Saving Private Ryan. Now, this is another war film, but one that's very different in tone and style from Schindler's List.
Yeah, Saving Private Ryan is known for its brutal realism, right? For that incredibly intense and graphic portrayal of the D-Day landings. I remember seeing it in the theater, and that opening scene just completely blew me away.
Yeah, it's an incredible feat of filmmaking, and Spielberg uses a combination of techniques to achieve this effect. Handheld cameras, shaky camera work, quick cuts, and sound design that completely disorients and overwhelms the viewer.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to replicate the sensory overload of combat to put us right there in the trenches with those soldiers.
Exactly, and one source points out that Saving Private Ryan isn't just a war film. It's a film about how war is experienced, how it shapes the perspectives of those who fight it. It's about the psychological toll of combat, the moral dilemmas that soldiers face, and the lasting impact of trauma.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not just about the big battles. It's about the small, intimate moments between the soldiers, the way they bond with each other, the way they try to make sense of the chaos and violence around them.
And that's where the character of Upham becomes really interesting, I think. He's the translator, the one who's not really a soldier, He's a scholar, an intellectual, and his perspective is so different from the other soldiers.
Yeah, Upham is kind of the odd man out. He's not desensitized to the violence. He's horrified by it. And his journey throughout the film is really compelling.
One source suggests that Upham is actually a stand-in for the audience. He's the one who's trying to make sense of the war, to find meaning in the midst of all the madness and bloodshed.
That's an interesting perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like he's the moral compass of the film, the one who's wrestling with the ethical complexities of war, the cost of human life.
Exactly, and Spielberg uses Upham's perspective to explore the psychological effects of war, the way it can break down even the most idealistic and well-intentioned individuals.
It's a stark reminder that war isn't just about physical battles. It's about psychological battles as well. It's about the trauma that lingers long after the fighting has ended.
And it's interesting to note that even though Saving Private Ryan is this realistic war film, it still taps into those familiar Spielbergian themes. The power of narrative, the importance of human connection, and the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah. Think about how Captain Miller, the leader of the squad, he uses stories to keep his men going. He tells them about his life back home, about his wife and his garden. It's a way for them to escape the horrors of war, even if just for a moment.
Exactly. It's like those stories become a lifeline, a way to hold on to their humanity in the midst of this dehumanizing experience of war. And it connects to that broader theme we've been discussing, the power of stories to help us cope with trauma, to make sense of the senseless.
So even though Spielberg is known for his blockbuster spectacles, he's also a master of exploring the inner lives of his characters, the psychological and emotional complexities of their experiences.
And he does so with a sensitivity and nuance that's often overlooked. He's not just interested in the big explosions and action sequences. He's interested in the human cost of those events, the scars they leave behind.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. Both films deal with war and trauma, but they do so in very different ways, reflecting Spielberg's evolution as a filmmaker. Where do we go from here? What other thematic territory does he explore in his later work?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about AI, artificial intelligence. This is a film that really delves into Spielberg's fascination with the blurred lines between reality and fiction. And it does so through the lens of science fiction.
AI. Yeah, it's a beautiful and heartbreaking film, but it also feels a bit different from his other work.
Yeah.
You know, it's more philosophical, more ambiguous. I remember being both captivated and confused by it.
Yeah, that's understandable. AI is a film that's been interpreted in many different ways. Some see it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of technology, while others view it as a meditation on the nature of humanity and what it means to love.
So where do these film theory texts fall on this spectrum of interpretations? Like, what insights do they offer into AI?
Well, they highlight the film's complex use of symbolism and its exploration of edible themes, particularly through the relationship between David the child robot
Right.
and Monica, his adoptive mother.
Ah, yes, David, the robot boy who just wants to be loved. It's such a heartbreaking performance.
Yeah, and one source suggests that David's quest to become real is actually a metaphor for our own human desire for connection and belonging. He's this artificial being who yearns for love and acceptance. And his journey is a reflection of our own struggles to find our place in the world.
That's a fascinating interpretation. It's like Spielberg is using this science fiction story to explore some very fundamental human emotions. Love, loss, longing, the need to belong.
Exactly. And he doesn't shy away from the complexities of this theme, David is a machine, but he's also capable of experiencing something akin to human emotion. And this raises some profound questions about the nature of consciousness, about what it means to be human, and about the ethical implications of creating artificial beings that can feel and think.
It's like he's asking us to consider the possibility that maybe consciousness isn't limited to biological beings, that maybe machines can evolve to a point where they can experience the world in a way that's similar to our own.
Yeah, and this connects back to that theme we've been discussing. The blurring of boundaries between reality and fiction. In AI, the line between human and machine becomes increasingly blurred, and this forces us to confront our own assumptions about what it means to be alive, to have a soul.
I'm starting to see how AI fits into this larger exploration of the human experience.
Yeah.
It's not just a science fiction film. It's a film about what it means to be human, about the nature of consciousness, and about the ethical challenges we face as technology advances.
And it's also worth noting that AI was a project that Spielberg inherited from Stanley Kubrick, who had been developing it for years before his death.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. So there's a connection between these two cinematic giants.
Absolutely. And one source points out that Spielberg's film is very much in conversation with Kubrick's work, particularly his masterpiece 2001, A Space Odyssey. Both films explore the themes of artificial intelligence, human evolution, and the vastness of the universe.
So it's like Spielberg is channeling Kubrick's vision, but also putting his own unique spin on it.
Exactly, and that's what makes AI such a fascinating film. It's a hybrid of two distinct cinematic voices, a blending of two very different approaches to science fiction. And the result is a film that's both visually stunning and intellectually challenging.
Okay, you've officially convinced me that there's a lot more to AI than meets the eye. It's not just a special effects extravaganza, it's a film that grapples with some really big questions about the future of humanity and the nature of consciousness.
And it's a testament to Spielberg's range as a filmmaker that he's able to move so effortlessly between genres, to tackle such diverse subject matter, and to consistently find new ways to surprise and challenge his audience.
Okay, I'm ready for more. What other Spielbergian gems are we going to uncover today?
Well, let's take a look at a film that takes Spielberg back to his blockbuster roots, but with a twist. Minority Report.
Minority Report. Tom Cruise, futuristic crime solving. And those creepy precog visions. It's a classic Spielbergian thriller, but also one that grapples with some pretty heady philosophical themes, right?
Absolutely. Minority Report is a film that's both a thrilling action spectacle and a thought-provoking meditation on free will determinism and the nature of justice.
So is Spielberg suggesting that we're all just puppets of fate, that our choices are predetermined?
That's the central question of the film, isn't it? And Spielberg doesn't shy away from the complexities of this debate. He presents us with a world where crime can be predicted and prevented, but at what cost? What happens to individual freedom in a society that prioritizes security above all else?
It's like he's asking us to consider the ethical implications of such advanced technology, to think about the trade-offs between security and freedom, and to question whether the ends always justify the means.
Exactly. And one source points out that Minority Report is filled with visual metaphors that connect to this theme of surveillance and control. For example, think about those spider robots that scan people's eyes to identify them. It's a very literal representation of how technology can be used to invade our privacy, to track our movements, to control our lives.
And there's that incredible scene where Anderton, Tom Cruise's character, is trying to escape the pre-crime police. And the billboards are like personalized to taunt him. It's like the entire city is watching him, judging him, closing in on him.
Right. It's a chilling depiction of a society where privacy is non-existent, where technology is used to manipulate and control individuals.
But it's not just a dystopian nightmare, is it? There's also a glimmer of hope in the film, a suggestion that we can still choose our own destiny.
Yes. One of the film theory texts highlights the importance of Agatha, the precog who helps Anderton to escape. She represents the power of intuition, the ability to see beyond the limitations of technology, and the potential for human connection to disrupt even the most rigid systems of control.
And she's the one who tells Anderton that he has a choice, right? That he can break free from the predetermined path that's been laid out for him.
Exactly. And this connects back to Spielberg's recurring theme of the power of individual choice. The ability to overcome adversity and shape our own destinies, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
So even in a film that's so dark and pessimistic about the future of technology, Spielberg still manages to inject a dose of optimism. A reminder that we're not just helpless pawns in the game of life.
Absolutely. And it's this ability to balance those moments of darkness and despair with glimmers of hope and redemption that makes Spielberg such a masterful storyteller. You know, he's not afraid to confront the darker aspects of human nature, but he also never loses sight of our capacity for compassion, our potential for growth, and our enduring hope for a better future.
Okay, I'm officially a Spielberg fanatic now. Every film we discuss reveals new layers of depth and complexity, new insights into the human condition, and a renewed appreciation for his masterful storytelling.
And we're not even done yet. There's still so much more to explore in his incredible filmography.
I can't wait. But before we continue our Spielbergian adventure, let's take a quick moment to gather our thoughts. We'll be right back to dive into the later chapters of his career and unravel even more layers of meaning. Okay, we're back and ready to continue our deep dive into Spielberg. We've already uncovered so much like hidden symbolism and social commentary. Can't wait to see what other surprises we find in his later work.
Well, get ready because his later films are just as rich and layered as his earlier ones, and he keeps experimenting with different genres, like pushing the boundaries of what a Spielberg film can be.
So where do we go next? Which film takes us deeper into how Spielberg changed as a filmmaker?
Let's talk about Catch Me If You Can. Now, on the surface, it just seems like a fun caper, you know?
Right.
But if you look closer, it's dealing with some big ideas about identity and deception and the search for a longing.
Catch Me If You Can. I love that one.
Yeah.
Leo DiCaprio is just so charming. As Frank Abagnale Jr., the con man who pretends to be everyone,
Right.
like a pilot, a doctor. And Tom Hanks is great as the FBI agent chasing him. It's just a fun, stylish film, and it's a true story, too.
Yeah, it's loosely based on Frank Abagnale Jr., who, before he even turned 19, managed to pull off cons worth millions of dollars by pretending to be a Pan Am pilot, a doctor from Georgia, and even a Louisiana parish prosecutor.
That's unbelievable. He was practically living a movie in real life.
Yeah.
So it makes sense why Spielberg would be drawn to this story. It's like the perfect mix of history, adventure, and psychology.
And Spielberg plays with this idea of life imitating art really cleverly. One source points out how Frank is constantly watching old Hollywood films, studying how Cary Grant and these other big actors behave. He's literally learning to be a con man for movies.
That's amazing. It's like he's blurring the lines between what's real and what's fake,
Yeah.
turning his own life into this performance.
Exactly. And Spielberg uses visuals to emphasize this idea. The film is full of mirrors, reflections, and these subtle references to other films. Like there's a scene where Frank is watching North by Northwest.
All right.
That Hitchcock film that's also about mistaken identity and a guy on the run. It's like Spielberg is winking at the audience,
Yeah.
telling us we're all playing roles to some degree, that our identity is kind of a performance.
It's like he's saying we're all always changing who we are depending on where we are, who we're with, what people expect from us.
Right. And for Frank, this performance becomes his way of escaping his past, coping with his messed up family and achieving his dreams. But It's risky, and it leads to his downfall.
So Catch Me If You Can,
Mm.
even though it has a charming main character and the stylish visuals, is actually a warning about the dangers of lying, the appeal of fantasy, and what happens when you live a lie.
Exactly, and it's interesting that even though Frank is a con man, we still root for him. We're drawn to his charisma, his intelligence, and how bold he is. But Spielberg reminds us his actions have consequences for himself and the people around him.
It's a classic story of someone who's too confident and then finds redemption. Frank's talent for tricking people is what brings him down. But it also gives him a way to redeem himself. He eventually realizes he can't run forever, that he has to face the music and find a way to use his skills for good.
And one source highlights how important Frank's relationship is with Carl Hanratty, the FBI agent. Carl is the serious by-the-book agent determined to catch Frank. But there's also a sense of respect between them, this kind of father-son thing that develops over the course of the film.
Yeah, I remember that scene where they're talking on the phone on Christmas Eve, and there's this unexpected connection between them. It's like they both see something familiar in each other, this shared loneliness, a desire for connection.
Yeah, exactly. And that dynamic is key to Frank's redemption. He realizes he needs structured guidance, a sense of belonging, and Carl, in a way, becomes the father figure that Frank never had.
So even though Catch Me If You Can is this lighthearted caper film, it's also about family, the search for connection, and the power of forgiveness to change things.
And it's another great example of how Spielberg can weave complex themes into genres that seem simple, creating films that are both fun and make you think.
Okay, so we've talked about Catch Me If You Can and how Spielberg shows us deception and redemption. What other themes does he explore in his later films?
Let's shift to The Terminal. On the surface, it seems like a heartwarming story about a man stuck in an airport. But it's a much deeper film than that.
The Terminal, the one where Tom Hanks creates this whole life for himself in JFK. I remember finding it really heartwarming. But I'm curious to hear what you've learned from the film theory texts.
Well, one source suggests that The Terminal is about displacement and belonging and the power of human connection. Tom Hanks' character, Victor Navorsky, he's trapped in this weird in-between place, you know? He doesn't belong to any country. It's like he's a man without a home stuck in this bureaucratic mess.
It's a very unique idea for a film, but I can see how it could be a metaphor for the immigrant experience.
Oh.
You know, that feeling of not belonging and being lost that people feel when they have to leave their home and start over in a new country.
Exactly, and Spielberg uses Victor's situation to explore the complicated reality of immigration, the challenges of adapting to a new culture, and how important it is to find human connection even in the most unexpected places.
Yeah, it's a film that's both funny and touching. We see Victor struggling to adjust to this strange environment, but we also see how kind strangers can be, how people from different backgrounds and cultures come together to help him.
Right, and that's a key theme in the film. The idea that even when things are chaotic and uncertain, human connection can still flourish. It's a message that's especially important today, in a world that often feels so divided.
It's like Spielberg is reminding us that no matter where we come from or what language we speak, we all share a common humanity. And those connections, those acts of kindness and compassion are what make life worth living.
Exactly. And it connects to a bigger theme throughout Spielberg's work, the importance of empathy and understanding. He's always encouraging us to see the world through other people's eyes, to understand their struggles, to celebrate their successes, and to recognize the shared humanity that connects us all.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's like Spielberg, even in his later work, is still going back to those core themes we saw in his early films.
Yeah.
Human connection, resilience, and the power of hope.
Absolutely. And those themes are explored in even more complex and nuanced ways as his career goes on. He's always challenging himself to find new ways to tell stories, to explore the human experience, and to connect with his audience on an emotional level.
Okay, so we've talked about Catch Me If You Can and The Terminal. What other Spielberg films are we going to talk about?
Let's discuss War of the Worlds. Now, this one seems like your classic alien invasion thriller, full of amazing visuals and suspense.
All right.
But it also reflects the fears of the world after 9/11, exploring themes of fear, paranoia, and how fragile our civilization really is.
War of the Worlds, the one with Tom Cruise running from those terrifying alien tripods. Yeah, that's a good one. It's a classic Spielberg mix of spectacle and suspense. But I can see how you could interpret it through a post-9/11 lens. That sense of vulnerability, the fear of the unknown, it's definitely there.
And one source mentions how Spielberg intentionally chose to tell the story from the point of view of a regular family, caught up in these extraordinary events.
Right.
Tom Cruise's character, Ray Ferrier, is just an average guy trying to protect his kids. He's not a soldier, not a hero, just a father doing his best to survive.
That's an interesting point. By focusing on the family dynamic, on the very human struggles of a father trying to keep his children safe, Spielberg makes the film feel emotionally real, even with all the sci-fi chaos happening.
Exactly. And choosing that perspective lets us feel the terror and chaos of the alien invasion in a very personal way. We're not just watching from afar. We're right there with Ray and his kids, feeling their fear, their desperation, their will to survive.
And Spielberg uses all his filmmaking skills to create this immersive, intense experience. Those amazing special effects, the sound design, the way he uses the camera to create a feeling of being trapped and scared. It's all done brilliantly.
But War of the Worlds is not just about the spectacle of the invasion. It's also about how society breaks down, about how fragile civilization is when faced with fear and uncertainty.
Yeah, we see people panicking, looting, turning against each other. It's a pretty dark view of human nature.
But even in all this chaos, Spielberg still finds those bits of hope, those moments of human connection that remind us we're capable of compassion even in the darkest times.
Yeah, I remember that scene where Ray and his kids are hiding in the basement with that other scared family, and they share their food and comfort each other. It's a small act of humanity amidst all the destruction.
Exactly, and those moments, those glimpses of empathy and kindness are what ultimately redeem the film, what keep it from becoming completely hopeless.
So War of the Worlds reflects the fears of the post-9/11 world, but it also gives us a message of hope, a reminder that even facing unimaginable terror, we can still connect with each other, support each other, and carry on.
And it's another example of how Spielberg's later films, while still being amazing spectacles full of suspense, also explore those complex themes he's always been drawn to. What fear is, how fragile civilization is, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
Okay, we're almost at the end of our Spielberg journey. What's the last film we're going to talk about?
Let's finish our deep dive with Munich, a film that takes Spielberg into even darker and more morally complex territory.
Munich, the one about what happened after the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tense and morally ambiguous thriller that stays with you.
And it's even more relevant today in a world where terrorism and political violence are still happening. Munich explores the dark side of humanity, the cycle of violence and revenge that can consume people and whole countries, and the difficult choices we make in the pursuit of justice.
It's a film that asks hard questions about what justice really is, about the price we pay for revenge, and if the ends ever justify the means.
Exactly, and Spielberg doesn't give easy answers. He shows us a group of Israeli agents who are ordered to hunt down the terrorists who carried out the Munich massacre. But their mission really messes them up physically and emotionally. They're haunted by what they've done, consumed by doubt and guilt.
It's like they get so focused on getting revenge that they lose sight of their own humanity.
Right. And this ties into a bigger idea in the film, the idea that violence only leads to more violence, that it's really hard to break the cycle of revenge. And Spielberg uses a lot of visual metaphors to show this. Remember those scenes where the agents are always surrounded by mirrors and reflections?
Yeah.
Like they're being haunted by their own actions?
Yeah, those reflections are really powerful. It's like they show the agents' inner turmoil, the moral compromises they have to make,
Yeah.
and the weight of guilt they carry.
Exactly. And those visual metaphors are just one example of how Spielberg uses film techniques to explore complex ideas and to create an experience that's both layered and thought-provoking.
Wow, I'm feeling so inspired right now. This deep dive into Spielberg has been incredible. It showed me how deep and complex his work is.
It's been my pleasure taking you on this journey. Spielberg's films are so rich and multi-layered, there's always something new to find.
So what does all this mean? What's the main takeaway from our Spielberg exploration?
I think the biggest thing we've learned is that even though Spielberg is known for making films that everyone loves, he's also a filmmaker who constantly explores deep themes. He uses his skill in filmmaking to show us the complexities of being human, the good and the bad, the happy and the sad.
He can make us laugh, cry, think, and feel, sometimes all at once. He's a true master, and his films will keep entertaining and inspiring us for generations to come.
And it's important to remember that Spielberg's films are more than just stories on a screen. They're reflections of ourselves, our hopes and fears, our dreams and nightmares.
So next time you watch one of his films, keep an eye out for those recurring themes, those visual metaphors, those moments of brilliance that make his work so special.
Think about how he uses light and shadow music and sound camera angles and editing to play with our emotions, challenge what we see. expand our view of the world, and remind us of our shared humanity.
Because underneath those stories that everyone loves, there's a deeper meaning, a richness of thought just waiting to be discovered.
And who knows, maybe you'll even learn something new about yourself along the way.
That's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It's a journey of discovery, exploring the unknown, and a chance to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
And with that, we'd like to leave you with a final thought. Since Spielberg always uses light as a metaphor for cinema itself, can we see all his films as a reflection on the power and responsibility of this dream machine?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the films of Steven Spielberg. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of ideas.